Okay, so today I was asked a question. Actually, yesterday I was asked a question, but I'm getting to it today. I've asked this person over TikTok, because that's where the conversation took place, if I was able to actually respond with long form video. They said that was fine, so I went ahead and set it up so I could do that. But this is over TikTok, and the person reached out. I'm going to move this just a little bit. There we go. But they said, hey, man, as a Calvinist, I don't believe in the concept of libertarian free will at all, as it doesn't make sense to me. And libertarian free will is this idea of, making decisions that are free, independent of God's control, independent of God's omniscience, and his ultimate sovereignty. But he says, I think there is a reason we make decisions. And he's right. There is a reason we make decisions, because we want to or desire to. And I believe God is sovereign over choices of our desires for his greater purposes. In Proverbs 21, verse 1, it states that the king's heart is like a stream of water in the Lord's hand, and that he will direct it however he wills, that he being God. He then says, but there is one verse that seems to be teaching libertarian free will, 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. I know this doesn't debunk Calvinism, as this is just about believers, but it's saying that God won't allow me to be tempted beyond my ability, and that he will provide the way of escape, and usually God delivers me. But from my point of view, it seems that I either seek to obey God more in the moment, and occasionally I seek to obey my flesh more, and that's why I give in. God has been discipling me and praying to, I'm sorry, and not praying to me, and I'm praying to him to keep me away from lust on a daily basis, has been working. But still, this verse confuses me. It seems to be inferring that in any of the times I gave into temptation, I could have instead taken God's way of escape. I've always figured God allows you to fall at times so that you may come to him with a broken spirit, and so that you may grow in the faith and continue to rely on his strength and not your own. But in this passage, it talks about my ability. He says, as if I can choose to overcome apart from God, but I know I can't do anything apart from him. I saw a video that James White did on this verse, and to be honest, I kind of felt like he dodged it and didn't really give an explanation. I just recently read that this verse may not be referring to just any, temptation, but more specifically the temptation to abandon the faith, which of course God would always deliver you from. But I don't know about that. Is there something I'm missing, certain, context, or maybe this verse isn't translated the best into English? I'd love to hear your thoughts. So again, that's everything that he said. And then I asked him if I could make a video about it. He said, yes, absolutely. So that was his question. So ultimately speaking, we've got a couple of different things that we need to look at first. The first thing we have to do is understand and stipulate the particulars of the sovereignty of God. And then we have to go down and realize how free is man in the fact that they are the creation, the offspring of God, the offspring of his thought, the creation of God. And he's right. He mentioned Proverbs 21, verse 1. It says, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He, meaning God, turns it wherever he, meaning God, will. So God decides where our hearts are going to go. And ultimately speaking, most people, whether they're reformed or not, are going to just completely bulldoze over the idea of humans making actions, humans actually being able to make decisions that they are in fact accountable for. In fact, I've met a lot of different reformed individuals who are of a mindset that we don't have free will at all. I want to point to one particular passage. This is Romans chapter 3. When Paul is writing to the church in Rome, which is a mainly Jewish community, he's stipulating the idea that there is no complete, just you guys are better than the Gentiles, right? There was this dichotomy, this continuous mindset and emotion because of the history of these people, that the Jewish people were better than the Gentiles because the Gentiles were mostly pagan and God's chosen people were the Jews, not the Gentiles. So they always had this mindset of we're better than you guys and all of that. But Paul sits there and he basically stipulates very clearly that the idea of being better than a person, or being, my face just exploded all over. Hold on one second. this idea of being better than a person or whatnot is completely against, what Jesus talks about. It in no way, shape, or form is well, in no way, shape, or form is it something that Jesus stipulates. Just because you were the chosen people of God does not mean that you are better than the other individuals. God used you for a purpose, and that's the reasons that he gave. This comes from the stepbible.org. This is Romans chapter 3, starting in verse 9. What then are we Jews, any better off? No, not at all, for we have already charged that all, both Jew and Greeks, are under sin, as it is written. So he's saying everybody's sinful. None is righteous, no, not one. No one understands, no one seeks for God. All have turned aside together. They have become worthless. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave, and they use their tongues to deceive. The venom of asps is under their lips. Their mouth is full of curses and bitterness. Their feet are swift to shed blood. In their paths are ruin and misery, and the way of peace they have not known. There is no fear of God before their eyes. Now we know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be stopped, and the whole world may be held accountable to God. For by works of the law, no human being will be justified in the sight, since through the law comes knowledge of sin. So go back up to verse 11 here and 12. Verse 10, 11, 12, all these top verses right here. He's using very universal language. No one is righteous. No one seeks after God. What do? We openly receive sin because we are an extension of Adam and Eve, the representative samples of humanity, the first two people. They became sinners, and their offspring became sinners as well. So we make decisions. But it is under the confines of the prison of sin. So with that in mind, we need to understand the sovereignty of God, right? Understand where we are. Now, where is God? God rules over all. I want to make this very clear to everybody, right? God rules over all people. God predestines his creation, which a lot of people right there are saying, no, he doesn't. Why would a loving God do that? That means he chose and we didn't. That's not what a loving God would do. First of all, it is what a loving God would do, because a loving God, to be completely fair, means that you understand how powerful and holy and perfect he is. You understand how sinful you are, and you understand that you're deserving of death. We all are. So it's not unfair for God to choose people. It's not unfair for God to save whom he will. In Romans chapter 8, verses 29 through 30, you hear things like, for those who are called, they're also predestined. Those who are, he foreknew, he also called. Those he called, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son. The idea of salvation has nothing to do with your choice. It has to do with God's choice. So that's about the way of salvation. God is in control over all of those things. So that plays right back into the Proverbs 21 verse 1 verse. I'll read that one more time. Or Proverbs 21 verse 1. Let me see if I can find it here. Proverbs 21, verse 1, the king's heart is a stream of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he will. So God's in control of all of that. And if you guys are interested in looking into the extent of God's power and what he chooses and how he chooses it and in what way he chooses it and for the reasons he chooses it, look at Ephesians and look at Romans. Those are two books that talk about it extensively. But you'll notice that in the comment that this person made about their confusion, the verse was 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13. So we're going to go ahead and read that real quick. So let me switch back over. Okay. So if you guys can see this, look up here, right? So for context, you guys can read all of this. Paul is basically outlining to the Corinthians that there is a problem with the ancestors and the fathers of these individuals that he's writing to at the Church of Corinth. Starting in verse 8, he says, and I quote, "We must not indulge in sexual immorality as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put Christ to the test as some of them did and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble as some of them did and were destroyed by the destroyer." Notice that capital D right there. That means it's a name. Now these things happened to them as an example, but they were written down for our instruction. So we're basically supposed to take what happened to them and learn from them. He then continues by saying, on whom the end of the ages has come, therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overcome you. This is the verse that he's talking about. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. This word ability, this is a verb, okay? Now the actual pronunciation of that word is this right here. I believe it's pronounced dunamai. I could be wrong there. Anyways, it's a verb. It's a present verb. But what we have to pay attention to here is, let's get rid of this here, is not just the fact that, God's going to not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, continuing, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Okay. So take that verse that seemingly is a problem, okay? You talk about libertarian free will and how this verse assumes maybe that libertarian free will exists. And that would be a contradiction from other verses like Proverbs 21:1. Break down the verse for me, okay? So the context is Paul writing to the people saying, hey, take the problems of your fathers, your ancestors, and learn from them. He says, there is no temptation that has overcome you that is not common to man. So everything they deal with, you deal with too. Everything you deal with, they dealt with. There's a back and forth understanding there, right? It's all common. And then he goes into the faithfulness of God, which I think is a good anchor to anybody who's struggling in sin. And he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. Okay. Now, notice there's not a period there. It doesn't just stop there. It continues. There's a comma. But with the temptation, meaning if you've got it, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So the way that I read this and the way that this is being set up by Paul is that you guys are going to be tempted. You guys are going to have these roadblocks in your way all the time. It's not about the fact that you on your own can defeat it. And that's when Paul says he's not going to let you be tempted beyond your ability, he's talking about not only those who are saved individuals, but he's talking about in the concept of, excuse me, he's talking about in the concept of not only being saved, but also having that way of escape. He literally mentions it directly after. Within that context, beyond your ability. But with temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. The enduring part, not being able to be tempted past your ability, what ability is he talking about? Is he talking about the ability that you exert or the ability that he exerts through you, right? No person in the entirety of Scripture was able to beat sin because of their strength. They were able to beat sin because God gave them the tools, and God's strength and his wisdom and his knowledge and his strength, he was able to do that through them. And that's why when we beat temptation, we don't praise ourselves, we praise God. So with that mentality in mind, the ability does not come from man. The ability comes from God. Okay, now read the verse again, right? Let me switch back. He says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. We all deal with the same stuff. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. So you're not confined, you're not in prison to the falling of that sin. You're not going to always never be able to escape. That's never a thing anymore. You guys are not slaves to sin anymore. But with the temptation, he will always provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So again, he provides the fact that we all deal with this. He provides the faithfulness of God. He provides the fact that God will restrain sin so that it's not keeping you a slave to it. And he's going to provide the way of escape. That's the context. That's what he's talking about. But I did think this was interesting. John Calvin actually has a commentary on this particular passage. Starting in, let's see, starting where the highlight starts right here. He said, God would not suffer them to be tempted beyond their strength. And then he comments on what's being talked about here. He, meaning Paul, exhorts them, however, to look to the Lord because of temptation. However slight it might be or may be, will straightway overcome us, and all will be over with us if we rely on our own strength. So again, we can't rely on our own strength for this. We got to rely on the strength of God. He speaks of the Lord as faithful, not merely as being true to his promises, but also though he has said. The Lord is the sure guardian of his people. So again, God's keeping everybody. He's holding them together. They're not a slave to sin anymore. They're a slave to Christ. God is keeping them. He says, the guardian of his people, under whose protection you are safe, for he never leaves his people destitute. Accordingly, he will have received you under his protection, again, with the protection of God. You have no cause to fear, provided you depend entirely upon him. For certainly this were a species of, deception. If he were to withdraw his aid in a time of need, or if he were on seeking or seeing us weak and ready to sink under the load, to lengthen out our trials still farther. Now God helps us in two ways, that we may not be overcome by temptation, for he supplies us with the strength, and he sets limits to the temptation. He said, it is of the second of these ways that the apostles here chiefly speak, or the apostle here chiefly speaks. At the same time, he does not exclude the former, that God alleviates temptation, that he may not overpower us by their weight, for he knows the measure of our power, which he himself conferred, or he has himself conferred. Let's see here. According to that, he regulates our temptation. The term temptation, I take here, is denoting in a general way everything that allures us. So everything that allures us, he pulls it back. He keeps it away enough for us to be able to rely on God and not be overtaken by the sin. That's the kind of overview of how I would respond to this gentleman asking about the possible inconsistency with libertarian free will possibly being talked about in this verse. I know a little bit longer video. This is not going to be edited. I don't care. Hope that was able to help you guys out. Let me know in the comments section if you guys have any more questions, like I mentioned at the top of this video. But if you guys do have questions, please be sure to let me know, and I will get to them as soon as I possibly can.